Bob Capetta from College of DuPage, here to give another lesson for Math for Health Sciences, this time to talk about histograms. Histograms represent the shape of a data set. If we have many, many numbers, we want to describe it. One way is to draw some pictures that represent that data set. And the shape of the data set is best represented by a histogram. The spread of the data set was best represented by a box plot. So here's some examples of some histograms. I'm not sure what this one is, but between 40 and 50, there seems to be one element in the data set. Between 50 and 60, maybe two elements in the data set. Between 60 and 70, maybe five. Over here, we're looking at vehicles, I assume, in terms of how many miles per gallon they get. And between 5 and 10 miles per gallon, apparently we have 15 vehicles that were in this data set. Between 10 and 15, we had 20 vehicles. Again, not very good gas mileage for that data set. Well, we've been looking at a data set, namely the diabetes data set. So let's go ahead and look at that again, and let's attempt to draw some histograms for that. So what do we have here? Again, we have all of the weight for the men in this first grouping and all of the weight for the women in that grouping. So if I highlight this W column and copy it, I'd like to be able to use that in my histogram to see how many data points fit within each category. So I'm going to use some technology to do that. I'm going to pull up a histogram drawer applet that we can use to make sense of this large data set. So what I would like to use is www.showdoor.org/interactive/activities/histogram. So you'll notice it's giving us one. It enables you to determine the interval size, the minimum value on the x-axis, the maximum value on the y-axis. You can see there's the 56 on the y-axis. We can update these things. And we have a title of average SAT scores, etc. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all of the data that's there. So we'll remove that data. Certainly clear data would also work to get rid of all of that data. I want to put the data that I have in. Now, I copied all of the data on the Excel spreadsheet, so I should be able to just go ahead and copy it, and it should be there. So let's see if I can find it. As I scroll to the top, using the scroll bar over here, we can move up and down through that data set. But as I scroll to the top, this is what I see. Now the applet's not going to like weight, it just wants numbers. So let's go ahead and remove weight from our list. Now, our interval size, I think it would make sense for our interval size to be something reasonable. We're going from a low of 100 pounds to a high of 320 pounds. So maybe 50 would be reasonable for our interval size. Our maximum value on the x-axis is 0. I'm not sure what my maximum value on the y-axis is going to be. We can take a look at that. Minimum value on the x-axis, again, I'm pretty sure that's going to be 100. And let's see what we do if we say, let's change the title as well, please. Weights. And let's see what this does when we say update data. Sorry, the window's not quite big enough to do this all at once. Once I say update data, what does it give me? It gives me this histogram, which gives us a pretty good idea about how this is behaving. Again, I'd feel better if I could have control over the interval size. So maybe if I make it 25 and I say update interval. Are my numbers any better? Maybe a little better. Minimum value on the x-axis, how about 80? Set x-min. Now this is more what I like. I have a reasonable number for my minimum. My intervals are reasonable as well. Each interval is 25. And that gives us a decent view of this histogram. And of course I will clear the title as well. Actually no, I guess the title was fine as it was. So you can play around with this a little bit to get ourselves a reasonable image for us to work with. Now I want to go back to the diabetes data. Let's collect something other than weights and see how that behaves. So we would expect heights to be fairly symmetric. So if I collect all of the heights in this data set, click on J, copy those heights. And if I plug those back into my histogram, I should get a visual representation of how those heights are behaving. So I'm going to grab those. I've got those copied. I'm going to plug those into the histogram applet that we were using, and we'll see how that histogram will look. So we need to go ahead and change the data. So I had all this data here. Let me clear that data. So all the data is gone. I'd like to put my data in, my due data in. I copied it in the Excel spreadsheet. These were the ages of the individuals in the diabetes survey. And that appears to be all of them. And I'm going to make sure there's no alphanumeric things. And sure enough, the height was also copied. So I don't want that to be in the histogram because that's not a number. So the title of this will be heights. And we need to think about some of these various things. Now, our interval size, should that just be an inch? Should it be 2 inches? Hard to say. Maybe we can try 2 inches and we'll see what's going to happen there. Let's say update data and see what kind of things we get. So this is interesting. We have our histogram. Can we make it a little bit prettier? So the minimum on the x-axis, maybe we can go with 50 inches. And I would like, so we'll set x min. And I would like my interval to be 2 inches. We'll update the interval. And now we have a relatively good version of the heights that we're using for our histogram. So nice numbers on the borders, and we can get a nice visual representation of the heights that we have here. Now, would we expect the heights for the men and the women to be different? Again, I think that's certainly a reasonable question that we could look at. But let's go back to the diabetes data one more time, and let's find one other set of data that we can look at to try to see what the shape of that data will be. The cholesterol data looks interesting, and you'll notice that not everybody has a cholesterol number. We have some gaps here. So let's go ahead and highlight the cholesterol number, and maybe I will sort it from lowest to highest, so if there are any gaps, we won't include those in our histogram. So we'll go to data, and we will sort that and expand, and you'll notice from a high of 443, and then we'll assume that goes down quite a bit from there. Again, I will highlight that column. I will copy that data, and then we'll move back to the histogram, and we'll see what the cholesterol looks like in terms of that histogram. So our data from before was on heights. This time we're going to look at cholesterol. Let's clear our data. What was there before we don't need anymore. And let's paste in the data that we copied from the spreadsheet. And you'll notice the low of 78, and let's scroll it up to the top. And again, you'll notice I have CHOL there. So we'll get rid of that. And now all I have are numbers in there for cholesterol. Now, how low did it go? It went from a low of 78 to a high of 440. So we're going to need to figure out what are some reasonable numbers for us to work with. The minimum value for the x-axis may be 70. The interval size from 70 to 400, maybe a decent interval would be 50. And let's update our data, and let's see how that behaves. So I will hit the Update Data button, and we'll see what this looks like, and decide if we want to adjust the histogram at all. Well, interesting, pretty balanced. You may want to have a few more, so maybe the 40 isn't quite what we want. So maybe I can set my x min again to 50. How will that change things? Maybe I can set my interval size to 30, give me a few extra categories. And maybe I like this a little bit better. So it's hard to know what your best histogram is going to be, but this gives us an indication about how these cholesterol numbers are distributed. Obviously, we have a few people way up here that have dangerously high cholesterols that will encourage them to do something about that, I would imagine. So a histogram is a way for us to represent a set of data visually. If we're dealing with large data sets, it is very helpful to use technology to help construct a histogram. It is a remarkably tedious exercise to do if you try to do that by hand. And that will complete this lesson.